Hello and welcome to the third installment of the Sudman Middleton lecture series. This is my pleasure to introduce Erik Heikkenen, who is a curator of the permanent collection of the American Numismatic Association, who's going to talk about a really interesting numismatic connection between the Battle of Little Bighorn and some numismatic items that were found there. Erik?
Okay. All right, as I said, the talk's going to be about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, but we're going to look at it from a different point of view. We're going to look at it from a numismatic perspective, one that hasn't been done before with all the work that's gone into the battle. This is the first time this is the first time that I could find that anybody has addressed a numismatic perspective or angle on it. This is just a general overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to give a historical overview of the battle itself and the conditions that led up to the battle, and then we'll get into a numismatic perspective or slant on the battle. Then we're going to talk about some battlefield evidence that talks primarily about one individual, a Cheyenne warrior by the name of Wooden Leg, who extensively discusses and talks about finding paper money on the battlefield while he's fighting and after the battle, as he's going across the field and going through the pockets of the soldiers and finding packs on the field. And then we've got some really unique secondary evidence as to paper money and coins that were discovered or spoke about for years after the battle, and some almost like urban legend type information and myths of paper money. And then we'll go into the archaeological recovery that occurred in 1984 and 85 of some coins that were found during the digs. Now the historical overview of the battle starts out in the spring of 1874 when gold was discovered in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And once gold was discovered, you just had a massive influx of settlers and miners moving into an area that was set aside by treaty for the Sioux and the Cheyenne Native Americans as the Great Sioux Reservation. But of course, you know, when gold is found, you can't keep anybody out of anywhere, and people began flooding into that area. And of course, then there was conflicts between the settlers and miners and the Native Americans. So to remedy that, General Sheridan, under the command of President Grant, set forth plans that we're going to go in there, we're going to try to buy the Black Hills from the natives so we can be in there legally. Well, that didn't go well, so Grant issued an ultimatum to the Indians: by January 31st, 1876, you must all come back to the reservation. Well, life on the reservation was horrible. Food was spoiled. They couldn't hunt buffalo. They couldn't do anything that they were used to. Their nomadic lives were taken from them, and now they just were living stagnant lives that you and I like to live now. But if you were on the prairie and you were hunting and going and wherever you wished, living on a reservation was not something you wanted to do. And of course, giving an individual an ultimatum, you be here by this time and place, that doesn't go over well with individuals. So they said, no, we're not coming in. And it didn't help also that the winter of 1875 was one of the harshest. So there was no way they could make it in by January 31st of the following year, 1876. It was just impossible. I don't know if you've ever been into Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming in February, January. It can get cold, windy, and there's a lot of blizzards. So they said, forget it, we're not coming in. Well, so that kind of upset President Grant and General Sheridan. So they devised a plan where they would have 3 pincers moving in on the natives. They figured they would be in the valley of the Little Bighorn. And this map here illustrates we had General Terry moving in from North Dakota, Fort Abraham Lincoln, and he was going to move west. And with him, he had about 1,000 troops, which included General Custer, or Lieutenant Colonel Custer, and the 7th Cavalry. And they were moving in from the west. Then you had General Crook coming in from the south with about 1,500 soldiers. And then you had Colonel Gibbons coming in from Montana, and he had about 450 soldiers. So the idea was to corral the natives into this Little Bighorn Valley, capture them, and bring them back to the reservation. Well, they had a pretty good idea. They knew they would be in that valley, and sure enough, they were. But they didn't quite understand how much or how big the village was going to be. Now, there's a lot of information out there that there were 10,000 natives in the village. Well, there was 10,000 or so natives, but as far as a fighting force, there was probably about 2,000 to 2,500 warriors of fighting age. So once they discovered the village, General Terry had released Custer, said, Custer, you go down and you start looking for these Indians. And so General Custer picked up their track and came upon the village here on the Little Bighorn River. Now, Custer then had a great plan. He was going to divide his forces and corral them up. He's going to have Major Reno attack from the south while he circled up, attacked from the north. And it's a fairly decent plan when you've been up there. I don't know if you've ever been to Little Bighorn Valley, but there are high buttes to the east and the west. So there was really nowhere for the natives to go. And it seemed like a good plan. However, they went in there with approximately 500 soldiers. And of course, you remember I said there was about 200 or 2,500 fighting age warriors. So they're vastly outnumbered. So this map kind of illustrates how the battle unfolded. Reno came in, met resistance, ran up into the hills here, set up a defense. Custer was riding up this way, came down to the river, met resistance, and then went up to the Last Stand Hill. And of course, we all know the story there. His troops were wiped out. But Reno survived with the majority of his troops. So that's just a brief overlook about what happened and how it all set up. Now we're going to look at the numismatic perspective. Now we do know, records indicate that on Wednesday, May 17th, 1876, that General Terry's column, which included Custer and the 7th Cavalry, were paid 2 months' worth of pay, about 14 miles outside of Fort Abraham Lincoln. And when you break that down by the number of individuals that were present at the battle that got killed, it was estimated that there was $6,500 to $6,700 worth of pay issued to enlisted members that were killed on the battlefield. And then there was $25,000 to $26,000 worth of pay to officers that subsequently got killed on the battlefield. So we know that there's approximately $3,1,500 to $33,000 present on the battlefield that was left behind in the pockets of the dead soldiers. So that lets you know that there's quite a bit of money laying around on the fields and in the pockets of these people and available for the Indians to go through and look at. Now we know that there was a lot of money just from that pay chart I showed you, but there's this interesting individual, Wooden Leg, who was a Northern Cheyenne warrior, and he participated in the battle. And at the time of the battle, he was 18 years old. And in 1930, he began giving interviews to Mr. Thomas Marquez. And during his interviews with the doctor, he repeatedly talks about finding paper money or green money. And at that time, he had no idea what the green paper was. And he didn't know what it was, but he was intrigued with the vignettes that were on the paper money. He thought it was very interesting. He didn't understand the overprints or the symbolism of anything on the money. And I just wanted to read you a couple of entries into that interview. And he talks about, I'm going to read one entry. As he's walking across the field, he walked over to a dead man, and he took from the soldier a folded leather package. And the soldier had 3 stripes on his left arm. it had lots of flat pieces of paper having pictures or writing that I did not understand. The paper was green color. I tore it all up and gave the leather holder to a Cheyenne friend. Others got packages of the same kind from other dead white men. Some of it was kept by the miners, but most of it was thrown away. I gave mine to boys for them to look at the pictures. So as a historian and a museum professional, I started thinking about, well, what type of paper money was this? What were these interesting vignettes that he found interesting and that he gave to the children for, basically play items? So during the time of the battle, 1876, legal tender notes were being used and issued to soldiers at that point in time. So we're guessing with the lifespan of a paper money, 12 to 18 months, you have your legal tender note, 4th issue, series 1874, would have been the most common piece of paper money that was available to the soldiers and subsequently found by Wooden Leg and the other Native Americans. So here's an example of a $1 bill that he could possibly have seen and the vignette that would have interested him. What I find ironic about the vignette, this is Christopher Columbus sighting land, and essentially he's sighting land, and a couple hundred years later it's basically the end of the Native Americans as life as they know it because of Mr. Columbus coming in the New World. Here's a $5 legal tender note, 4th issue. This is a series 1875. And we have the wood chopper on there, which they would have been familiar with. They would have seen this and thought, well, here comes a white settler. They're depicting that even on their money or these green pieces of paper. And it is possible that there could have been some national banknotes with the soldiers, as this national banknotes were used at the forts and in the settlements that they would pass through. And here's a couple of the vignettes. We got the Pilgrims. And then there's another, this is a $5 note, national banknote. Again, Christopher Columbus on the left, which I thought was quite ironic. And then on the right, you also have a Native American princess. And here he is discovering the New World. So the secondary evidence that appears throughout history is some really unique information. Now after the Battle of Little Bighorn, General Crook, Terry, and Gibbon, they finally meet up. And they realize that Custer has been wiped out. And so they're out looking for vengeance. After they bury the soldiers, General Crook takes off towards the Black Hills, and he picks up the trail of a large group of Native Americans. And in September of 1876, he encounters a large village at Slim Buttes. And he engages them and captures the village. As they're going through the village, the troopers start uncovering 7th Cavalry items. A couple guidons, some boots, gloves, saddles, and horses, all branded with the 7th Cavalry mark. But they also discuss finding large sums of money. And they know that this has come from the soldiers. But ironically, again, the Indians still aren't aware of what this paper money is. And there's a few privates and corporals that describe finding paper money on toy horses made for the children to play with. And they're strapped over the toy horses as saddle blankets and made into little shapes of teepees. So at this point in time, there are some natives that understand the value of paper money, but there are others that do not. Then we talk about, this is a very interesting piece of urban legend, or perhaps even, we're not quite sure if this is true or not. It's just something that keeps being told and told again. But in June of 1936, in Busby, Montana, which is just north of the battlefield, the Little Bighorn, there was a local individual, Montcure, that erected a monument to Chief Two Moons, who participated in the battle of Little Bighorn. And in this monument, he reburies 2 moons along with artifacts that were found from the Battle of Little Bighorn. And on the monument, he has this strange inscription on the monument. And one of the inscriptions talks about a hiding place and location of money and trinkets taken from dead soldiers on the battlefield. So it's just kind of weird. I wanted to read you the inscription that's on the monument. And as you see here, it was broken into in 1960 and everything was removed. And when I read the inscription, you'll know why it was broken into. And it's amazing that it was not destroyed and broken into sooner. So the individual writes on the monument, "Why I erected the Two Moons Monument." And he lists these things out, and he says, "History and location of Starved to Death Rock, Bozeman Expedition, 1874. Then he says, 2 soldiers got away from the Custer Battle. History, Indian Fort up Busby Creek." And of course he says, "Hiding place and location of money and trinkets taken from dead soldiers." And then he says, to be opened June 25th, 1986. Then he tells you how to open it. He says, "Keys, remove screws with offset screwdriver." And then he signs it. Then he also put in a sealed envelope in this monument. And my best guess, and the historians I talked to when I went up to the battlefield, is that this sealed envelope was the map to all this stuff that he says is out there. So it's 1960, it gets broken into, and we never recover any of these trinkets or paper money. Now what's interesting is the first half we talk about evidence of paper money being found throughout the battlefield by Wooden Leg, and then we hear about the battle at Slim Buttes, the soldiers finding paper money, and then the Two Moons Monument. But that's all speculation, and you've got interviews of somebody that participated in the battle, and sometimes their memory is a little bit hazy. But we do have some hard concrete evidence of numismatics being present at the battlefield. And in 1983, a fire swept across the battlefield and the National Monument there. Somebody had thrown out a cigarette and started the whole field on fire. And it swept through, and in doing that, it reduced vegetation that had been across the battlefield since about 1879-78. Nothing had been done to that battlefield. It had been held almost as a monument to the soldiers since day one. It was sacred ground to the natives and to the cavalry. So it was basically just left alone. And over that time period, it had been run over by cactus and yucca and just sagebrush and everything. So in 1983, when that fire swept through, it cleared out all that brush, all the cactus, everything. And what it left was just soil. And what that allowed to happen was visitors and monument workers began finding shell casings and bullets and bone fragments and turning that stuff into the monument park rangers. So the National Park Service decided this is a perfect opportunity for us to do some archaeological surveys and digs in that area. So 2 individuals, Dr. Richard Fox and Dr. Douglas Scott of the National Park Service, planned a series of archaeological digs in 1984 and 85. And this is actually a photo from the 1984 dig. And as you can see, the ground is pretty bare up in here, up there by where that car is. And typically that was just ravaged with cactus and everything. So this was a perfect opportunity. Well, during the dig that they conducted in 1984 and 85, they uncovered 5 shield-type nickels. And the location of the nickels was very interesting and told the tale of the battle along with the shell casings and everything that they were finding there. And this is a map of the location of where they found the 5 shield nickels. They found one over here. This is the Reno defense site that I showed on the map. This is where Marcus Reno retreated and dug in for a day and a half. Then they found 2 more up there in the red circle, field specimen 3911A and B. Now they found those in a grave, in one of the graves that they decided that they were going to dig up and see if there was any soldiers left in there. Previously they had removed all the soldiers in 1882 and put them in a mass grave. But there had always been talk that some of these markers that dot the battlefield today, that there are still soldiers under there. Then they found field specimen 6756 down in the deep ravine, or the south skirmish line. And then 676 they found on Custer's Last Stand Hill. But you can see, if you remember the map that I showed you, we have Reno coming up this way for retreat. You've got Custer going this way, going to the river, and then going up. So these coins follow the path of Custer and the path of the shell casings and the spent bullets that they were finding. Okay, this is the first coins that they found. As you remember, they decided that marker or headstone 199, they were going to excavate that area. There had been rumors that there was still somebody in that grave, and there was somebody still in that grave. Actually, there was partial somebody in there. As you see here, you got an arm extending this way. Then you have your fingers, and you really can't see it, but up over this way, there's some skull fragments. Well, in this excavation, they discovered 2 shield nickels. And the position of the shield nickels, as you can see here, there's one on top of the other. You've got one here and one right there. And the relation to where they were sitting, the archaeologists, there were buttons around the nickels to the left of it and the top, and there was a button down below. And in relation to the skeletal remains and the buttons, they determined that these 2 nickels, 10 cents, were in the right pocket of the soldier. Now they determined that the soldier that they found there was probably 17 years old, about 5 feet 7.5 inches tall. And at the time of his death, his skull was smashed, but he had no other signs of injuries. Now, there's only one individual that meets that criteria, 17 years old. You had to be 19 to 20 years old to enlist, but if you had your parents' permission and you were younger, you could enlist. So there's only one person like that, and the height-wise, and his name was Private Willis Wright. And we're not quite sure if it is him, because we don't do there's no DNA, there's no survivors or anything, but he fits all the criteria, height-wise and age-wise. Now this, I actually went up there. The photo, Dr. Scott sent me photos of the dig, the original photos, but I just couldn't use them. So I called up there and I introduced myself and I said, I'd like to come up and look at your nickels. And they said, sure, come on up. So I went up there a week before today. Actually, I was probably on the battlefield a week ago today. And this is the first one that was recovered in marker 199. This is field specimen 3911A. It's an 1869 shield nickel. And here's the reverse of it. Then there's 3911B, which was underneath it. And here's the reverse. The third nickel that I looked at, and we're going to go into more detail as far as the varieties and types of these nickels that were there. But the third nickel was discovered up here in the deep ravine, and that was field specimen 6756, and it's an 1876 shield nickel. And as you can see, it's corroded pretty well there. And the third nickel over here by Reno. And this is the original photo of its discovery here. This is, of course, a trawl, and this is just a digging tool that they're using just to show the relation. And this was also an 1876 nickel. Now, this particular coin was found in what is called the L entrenchment. And at the battle site, there are still some trenches, crude trenches, that were dug by the soldiers at the time of the battle. And those trenches still exist. Now, they didn't have any material, shovels or picks to dig these trenches. What they would do is break the canteens in half, so you had two pieces, and they would scrape the hard Montana soil out of the way. And I can't imagine digging a trench with a piece of tin in 100-degree weather while you're being attacked by Native Americans and there's guys dying everywhere. But this particular coin was not available to me to photograph or examine at the battlefield. But speaking with Dr. Scott, he says this coin, he's also a coin collector, the condition of this coin, he says, is about uncirculated. So that's pretty amazing. It's been in the ground for that long, and he says that it's got fine details, and it's just perfect almost. And then the fifth coin, which was also not available to me for examination, was found on Last Stand Hill. And we do have images, some photos of those. This is an 1870 piece. And these are national park photos here. That was not available either for examination. But let's go back to the first ones that we talked about that were discovered in marker 199. This is field specimen 3911A. And as I examined the coin up there, I came across two really interesting pieces on this coin. And I think my photos I'm not very good at digital photography, so I had to end up circling this. But there is a die crack that extends from this laurel leaf dangle here, and it runs all the way down to here. And then there's another die crack that starts up here in the arrows and runs through the arrows, through the arrowhead, and into the shield here. But the condition of the coin is consistent to a coin that would grade out of fine to very fine. There is some cleaning, of course, that they did. And you can see right here in old museum collections, they would put the accession number on the coins. And that's what this material is here. Oddly enough, the reverse of this coin had a cud right over here. So the obverse has two die cracks. The reverse has a cud. And I thought that was kind of neat that they would use two dies that were essentially defective dies for the obverse and reverse. And the condition of this coin is about fine to very fine also. As far as the type and variety of this particular coin, it's a Breen 2482. Now, if you look up here at the arrowhead here, you've got the shoulder that extends here, and then you've got this shoulder that's sliced off. And that's referred to as a sliced arrowhead variety, according to the Complete Guide of Shield and Liberty Head Nickels. So I thought that was really neat to be able to find something that has actually been documented with other shield nickels. So you can see how that's just sliced right off, and this shoulder or lobe of the arrowhead extends. So as far as the obverse, that would be a type 1 obverse hub. And that's found on half of the 1869s, which this piece is 1869. Then the reverse hub was a type B reverse hub, and it had a blunt ray on the star. If you notice here, all these stars here are nice and pointed, except for this one. It's blunted. It's almost cut off there. And that's one of the diagnostics for that variety. Specimen B from marker 199 Again, was about a fine to a very fine coin. Exhibited corrosion and some cleaning, and was very obvious of which side the monument in the national park had been displaying. One side would be really cleaned on all these specimens, and the other side would be, dull and corroded. And here's the reverse of it. It's got some corrosion and exhibits some minor cleaning. But this is also an interesting variety, 3911B, which was found in marker 199. It was a Breen 2485. It too exhibited the sliced arrowhead diagnostic. It's a type 2 obverse, and then a type D reverse, which is found in all of the 1870s. And that's determined by doubling in the denticles here. This is the field specimen 6756, which was found in the deep ravine, or the south skirmish line. This one exhibits a lot of fire damage and corrosion. The deep ravine is just that. It's a deep ravine where water drains off the battlefield and the area there. It's heavily wooded and a lot of brush. And even when the fire swept through in '83, a lot of that brush and trees were burnt, a lot of heat. And this one, the condition is good to find. And you can see a lot of that corrosion right in here. And this one determined that it was a Breen 2505, a type 3 obverse hub. If you notice here, the arrowhead's intact. The shoulders are both extending. It's not sliced like the other ones. And a type D reverse, right here, has the double denticles. And these double denticles appear in all coins minted from 1870 to 1883. So that made it quite easy for me to
business people. These are warriors and savages, and they were traveled around from land to land. They were fighting each other long before America was discovered, the different tribes, and killing each other off.
Yeah.
These are warriors, not business people.
Right, and and as I was, and he makes a good point. They're business people. Most of the people they're encountering are fur traders or miners, and if I'm a fur trader, I'm not going to give, the native gives me 30 beaver pelts. I'm not going to turn around and give them pieces of paper. They want something concrete that they can use in trade for that. And a lot of times it was cooking utensils, blankets, clothing, horses, axes, anything like that.
Wampum wasn't used on the East Coast.
Right.
Was it used in the plains? Or?
No, primarily the crow and the blackfeet, there was a value assigned to elk teeth. And that was very similar to wampum, but not as much as you would think. Wampum was used quite heavily, but elk teeth were used as more as a ceremonial, had a ceremonial value, and you see elk teeth shirts. But they did have a value, but not so much as a money value as you would think with wampum, but they were sought after. If you had elk teeth, you could trade with them, with other natives.
The money thing, paper money was not what you used when you traveled, by and large, up until after the National Bank notes were really acceptable, and you were confident you could take them to different banks and things like that. So Native Americans, it's not a unitary culture. They're all different cultures, different separate tribes. They didn't have the close connection that Americans was. And so the whole idea of using paper, they wouldn't have used paper in trade at all. So the Indians would have had much less contact with paper than they would have had with coins, just because if you went from Omaha to St. Louis, you couldn't take the paper from there to the other place and expect them to accept it. This is with the white culture.
Did they ever do any archaeological work on the other side of the river where the tents were pitched, or was it?
Where is National Park Service land, and there is some private land in here that is leased out. If you've ever been up there, there's a road. What you see here is a road that goes up to the Reno Benteen Defense Site, and you follow that road, and about from here to here is private land that is leased. Now down here is private land, and you're on the Crow Indian Reservation. This whole battlefield is Crow Indian Reservation. And a lot of these individuals have been burned one too many times by documentary film writers, photographers, and historians and archaeologists that want to come into this area and excavate and do digs. So there has been some activity down in there by historians and archaeologists, but nothing compared to what has gone on up here on the east side of the river. Now the distance we're looking at from here to here is about 3.5 miles. And the village stretched approximately 2 miles. So we're talking 10 to 11,000 teepees in this area. And it's amazing. I mean, we've got high ground here, and you've got high ground here, and it's a perfect area. You've got the river, and it's flat land. You've got plenty of pasture for your horses, of which they say there was about 12 to 14,000 horses. It just baffles my mind when I went up there. I'd been reading about the battle since I was 7 years old. And I went up there last week, and I could not understand, as Custer was riding this ridge, how he thought he could take that village. There's no possible way. And, we all hear the story that, Reno backed out of it. He chickened out. That's why Custer got killed. That's far from the truth. As Reno crossed this river and charged into the village, he met stiff resistance about right here.
Well, the biggest problem.
And he had to retreat. There, he had to save his men. And it was about right here where he set up a skirmish line. Custer was supposed to, according to the plan, come right down here and help him out. But when he came to the river, he met resistance too. Essentially, he was cut off from Reno and retreated up this way.
Well, a lot of people believe that Custer's biggest problem was that he didn't understand. They thought that Indians would retreat and run and panic. They never expected to be on the defense.
Right, and what's odd is in all the literature that you read from the Native American perspective is they were not expecting an attack. They had been up the whole night before celebrating that they are all together and having a good time, being free Indians. They were not expecting an attack. Typically, the way you would attack a Native American village is in the morning. They've been partying all night, they're sleeping in the morning. So that's when you rush in. But this battle occurred about midday, about 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the reason Custer did not wait for the next morning is he thought he had been discovered by the natives. About 10 miles east, he had a report from some of his soldiers that they had dropped a giant crate of hardtack, crackers that were issued to the soldiers. As the soldiers went back to get it, there were 4 Indians there opening the crate. They killed one of the Indians, the other guys got away. So they told Custer, we've been discovered. There's no sneaking up on them and attacking in the morning. And that played into that's a big part of why he attacked in the mid-afternoon. If he would have waited and attacked in the morning, he may have had better luck, but I doubt it. Now, the Indians, the reason why they didn't think any soldiers were coming, a week beforehand, as General Crook was coming up from the south, as I showed you on that map, he engaged the the same group of Indians in the Battle of Rosebud Creek. And the Indians fought a different battle that they hadn't fought before. It was actually similar to a Civil War battle where there were lines of defense on both sides. And the Indians were forming lines and skirmish lines and flanking Crook. And they'd never done that. And they attributed that battle to Crazy Horse. He was starting to get smarter, going, you know, I can come in with little groups of natives and set decoys and draw people out and divide their groups. But, you know, that tires out my horses, and it's not fun. I mean, it's fun, but ultimately it just wears me out. So he decided, I'm going to play on their battlefield, and he set up lines of defense, and General Crook was shocked by that, and it threw him into disarray, and Crazy Horse took advantage of that and beat him there too. They lost about 15 soldiers, and Crook retreated back. So some of this blame, historians often say, can be put on General Crook, because he did not continue northward to complete that pincer move. The battle was on June 25th, 1876. Major Reno was in this defensive position for a day and a half. 2 days after the battle, General Terry comes in, and General Gibbon comes in, and if they would have waited 1 day, they would have had nearly 2,000 soldiers to equal the 2,000 there. Crook was nowhere to be found because he was licking his wounds back after the Battle of Rosebud. So what's interesting about this, you know, looking at it, you know, we hear so much about the Battle of Little Bighorn, you know, Custer's Massacre, the Last Stand Hill, all of this. And there's been numerous, countless volumes written, paintings, movies, documentaries. And with all of this information out there, we're still, you know, our historical knowledge of the battle is still filled with a lot of, you know, urban legends and myths that Custer did this and, you know, Crazy Horse did this and Sitting Bull, you know, you always hear Sitting Bull was involved in the battle. Well, he was there and he was the main chief of this huge village, but he was not of fighting age. He was directing the battle from time to time, but for the most part, we're talking about warriors that are 18 to 25 years old, in their prime, you know, young men ready to do anything. They were participating in the battle. So there's a lot of misinformation out there as to what happened there, who was involved, and you know, of course, a lot of that is based upon what you and I have seen in Hollywood and dime store novels. But this is very interesting to see a archaeological perspective that was conducted by Dr. Scott.
In Custer's troop was over 5'8".
Well, I think there was a couple guys that may have been approaching 5'11", 6 foot. I'll have to check the records.
Well, darn few anyway.
Yeah, there were very few. What's very interesting is the makeup of the 7th Cavalry. A lot of immigrants, you know, guys from Ireland, Germany, and they saw the opportunity to join the cavalry to bring them westward. They do their time, and they're already out in the west. This is where they want to be, where you can get land. Or they'd let the army bring them out, and then they would desert, so they, you know, didn't have to suffer in the army anymore.
What was the location they were intending to corral the Indians troops to?
Well, the three pincer move?
What was the location the troops were intending to corral the Indians?
Well, they had a pretty good idea that they would be in the Valley of the Little Bighorn. So when they set up that three pincer move, they determined that they would meet on the Yellowstone River, which is just east of as the Little Bighorn runs. The Yellowstone River comes down up here in the east and then shoots down. It's prime buffalo country up there. And of course the natives go where the buffalo are. So they had a pretty good idea that they were going to be in the Valley of the Little Bighorn or by Billings, Montana, that area. So when they left, they said, we'll meet mid-June we don't meet you there, keep going in that direction and we'll meet up.
But they were gonna drive them back to the reservation.
They were going to take them back to the reservation.
What was the location of that?
It was the Great Sioux Reservation. It was very large. It encompassed about the western half of South Dakota into Nebraska. Let me show you on this map here. It's a good question. This area right in here, that was the Great Sioux Reservation. Very large area, encompassed the Black Hills, the Badlands, and extended eastward and southward, eastward into South Dakota and southward into Nebraska.
How did the mining activity pursue after this battle?
Well, after that battle, of course, everybody that was living in Deadwood and these other little mining towns in there were just terrified. And they were, that's why General Crook began pursuing them, and he pursued them into South Dakota, the Black Hills. If you remember the Battle of Slim Buttes that we talked about, met them there. And his concern was that they were going to go into Deadwood, the natives, and wipe out Deadwood, South Dakota, and the other small mining towns. So everyone was really frightened. And it wasn't good for the natives. Everybody was armed, and everybody knew about the battle. So if they saw Native Americans, rather than just, shoot on sight, basically was what was happening. And had everyone scared, of course. It was the largest concentration of Native Americans ever in that area, in one location.
Did Grant feel that he accomplished his plan?
Yes.
Issuing the ultimatum?
Because eventually, we ended up getting the land, sadly enough. You always hear about taking out the buffalo. You kill the buffalo, you kill the natives. Well, they eventually drove all the buffalo out.
A lot of money in the hides as well.
The hides, and once the hides were gone, the bones were used for fertilizer, everything. So ultimately, yes, the end result was,
Were the soldiers paid in new currency? Your examples were beautiful. Is that how they were paid in new currency?
They were paid in legal tender notes, and as far as when you say new currency.
New or used? This was all crisp material.
Oh, well, yeah, those examples I showed you, see, I have the benefit, with the Money Museum, the examples I showed you were from the BB collection. So those are the best that you're ever going to see, so.
How were they paid? Were they paid new or used, do you know? Or?
I don't know. I imagine it's going to be used in circulated money. The quartermaster would travel and hit each fort and pay them every 2 months. So I'm not, as far as if the money was fresh or new, I don't know. My guess is that it's circulated.
Do you think the fact that the coin was corroded on one side and fairly nice looking on the other, it just laid on the surface for years and years and years? Just laid on the surface of the ground?
Well, that area, the deep coulee area, there's a lot of water runoff there, and it's very heavily wooded. And it was discovered with the reverse up, and that's why you see a lot of corrosion and fire damage on that. These coins were actually discovered about 6 inches under the ground over time. And the markers 199, where the two were sitting on top of each other in relation to like a right pocket, those are a little further underground. But the genesis of the archaeological digs there, individual found a tooth, a visitor found a tooth, and that prompted them to say, hey, we've got a great opportunity here. You got a visitor coming up with a human tooth on a battlefield, So I got all the archaeologists saying, hey, we should take advantage of this, and they did. And Dr. Scott has done an extensive study on the shell casings by looking at the firing pin patterns, and that has helped determine even better, get rid of some of those myths and urban legends as to what happened to these soldiers. The firing pin analysis of the spent shell casings that they found actually give you a better idea of how the battle was going. You can find some over here with one firing pin, some over there, and you can track this individual as he goes across the battlefield. And where the coins were located on that map is a good indication. You can follow, the coins were found where each group of cavalrymen were killed. So you can see, well, they were grouped here, so we find specimen 567 or 576. They go into the deep ravine and you find that one coin that you mentioned. Then they go up to Last Stand Hill and you find another one. So it's following the battle and following the shell casings.
You said the Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg, he was interviewed.
What's that?
Wooden Leg was interviewed.
Yes, he was.
Who was that by?
Thomas Marquez. He ended up writing a book, I Fought, a warrior that fought Custer.
Well, one of the biggest myths I've heard is that most of the soldiers actually committed suicide.
Well, you hear bits and pieces of that. One of the things soldiers used to say is, leave one bullet for yourself. You know, the machismo thing.
One of the biggest rumors I've heard of the battle is that most of the soldiers committed suicide.
I've heard they were sexually mutilated too.
Well, it was traditional for, after a battle, for natives to mutilate the dead. You can't go into the afterlife and hunt and be a warrior if you're missing your arm or your leg or your appendage, and you can't propagate in the afterlife. But that's one of the myths that's out there. There's actually a book called Lakota Noon, which is a very good Native American perspective. And these natives speak of seeing some individuals commit suicide, but whole-scale suicide, 30, 40 guys, is probably not true. But there is incidences where they say, the white man was getting away and he shot himself. He could have got away. But, the cavalry used to say, save one bullet for yourself. I don't know. I was in the Air Force. I don't know about that Army stuff,
Let's give Erik a hand. Thank you very much, Erik.
Thanks.